Hello friend, how are you doing today? My name is Mary, this is Happily Ever Esch, and today I want to talk about all the books that I read in July. I'm filming my July wrap-up a couple days early. I'm really on the ball this month. So I finished 5 books. I'm in the middle, like the exact middle of 3. So I'll be talking about all 8 of those books here. I had a pretty good reading month in July. I really enjoyed what I read in the beginning of the month, and I kind of didn't do so great at the end of the month, but we'll discuss it all here. Thank you so much for stopping by my little corner of the internet. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and please subscribe if you want to see more bookish stuff from me. But without further ado, let's hop on in to the wrap-up. The first book that I finished in July was middle grade, and that's The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise, and this is by Dan Gemeinhardt. I listened to most of this on audiobook, and it was such a treat. In this novel, we follow Coyote, who lives with her father, who she very affectionately calls Rodeo, and they live in a school bus, and they kind of have a very non-traditional life. They travel all over the United States, and in this story, we continue to learn about Coyote and her story, but she's on a quest to return home. We embark on a journey with her in her quest to return home, so there is kind of like this odyssey travel aspect to the story that I loved, and then it's all about all the characters that they meet along the way. It's told in such a loving and fun manner. I can see young readers really enjoying this. There also is a lot of middle grade literature references in this, which I think is a lot of fun, especially for a young avid reader. But this book totally captured my heart. It's heartwarming and sad, but there's just so much hope in it. It deals with grief in a really good way for young readers, and there's just a lot of compassion and love and understanding in this book. I think there's a lot of empathy in this book, and overall I really enjoyed it. I gave it probably 4.5 stars. Yeah, I think if you enjoy road trip stories, adventure stories, but that have like a little more bite and depth to them, I think that this is a great book. This was published pretty recently. I didn't realize that, but yeah, I really enjoyed this one. And with a male writer writing from a young girl's perspective, I feel like that can be hit or miss, but I do feel like he captured a really interesting and good tone for Coyote, who is kind of telling the story. So overall, I would highly recommend this one for a fun book, but also one that has like I said, a little more depth to it. It was really phenomenal. And the audiobook was wonderful. I didn't want to put it down. So this was such a great middle grade read for me. I did want to read the first line to this because I think it's a really great way to start a story. And the theme of stories and storytelling is really important to Coyote, our main character. And I think as a book lover, I really identified with that. So I'm going to read the first little paragraph. There were big days, and there were small days, and there were bad days, and there were good days, and I suppose I could pick any of them for my once upon a time. But if I'm going to be truthful, and truthful is something I always aim to be, then really there is only one best place to start this story. So really, yeah, I was just totally enamored with this book. It was phenomenal, and I think if you like middle grade, you should give this one a go. Next is a book that I buddy read with Annie over at Eat, Drink, and Be Reading. I adore Annie, and it was so great to buddy read a book with her, and I'm so glad that I did end up buddy reading this book, and that's The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This was a hard read, a heavy read, but I think such a necessary read. The Underground Railroad is kind of what it says about on the tin, but there is a twist in that the Underground Railroad is a physical railroad that has a train and tracks. And we start the story being introduced to Cora and her life as a slave on a plantation, and her whole life has been affected by her mother, who was a slave who ran away, and there's kind of this legend surrounding her mother, and Cora ends up also running away. And so we're following Cora and her quest for freedom. While this book is focusing on the time of slavery and the horrible treatment of African Americans, it also kind of blows out, and each stop on the Underground Railroad is almost like mirroring a different time in United States history and just the repeated oppression, the systematic oppression of Black individuals in America. So I just thought that that was brilliant in the way that he's able to continue to show the effects of slavery in Cora's life. It was just masterfully done. There's so much to discuss in this. Like I said, I'm so incredibly glad that I buddy read this book. It is a book you could kind of zoom through because it's very compelling storytelling. It is very hard. The themes are hard, and some of the things that happen in this book are very hard and heavy, but he does tell a compelling story. But it is so good, I think, to slow down and really discuss and think about the things that Colson Whitehead's doing in this book. Overall, I really enjoyed this. I can definitely see this becoming an American classic. He just tells the story so masterfully in such a short, barely 300 page book. He really draws this epic, sweeping story, and really it's the story of race relations in America, and there's just so much in this book. Talk on and on and on about it, but it was a necessary read, a well-written and compellingly told story, and I'm so glad that Annie and I buddy read this at the beginning of the month. Next, I finished another middle grade, and that's called Look Both Ways by Jason Reynolds. I also listened to this on audiobook. So this book follows 10, I believe, different perspectives, but it's all centered around the blocks around a school. And so I just loved that we're following a place and then all these different characters that experience that place and how they experience their life. I would read a book about every single one of these characters. Jason Reynolds, in such a few pages and short chapters, just makes these characters so compelling, and he gives you a glimpse into their life. I'm so drawn into this type of storytelling, and I just loved the care that he had with his characters. This was another book that I could just read and tell that middle graders would love it, some of the humor and just the things that he throws in. So I love that I as an adult could appreciate it, but I could also see my middle grade self or other middle graders just absolutely loving this. I think it takes a very deft touch to be able to tell a story in such a way that appeals so broadly. I will definitely be picking up more of Jason Reynolds' work. I couldn't give this book a full 5 stars just because I wanted more from each character, but for what this book was, I thought that it was stellar, and the audiobook is amazing. It has a full cast of phenomenal narrators, so I highly recommend, if you enjoy audiobooks, pick this one up. It's well worth the 4 hours that it'll take you to listen to it. Next book that I finished is The Beauty in Breaking by Michelle Harper. This was my Book of the Month Club pick, and I read it the same month I got it. I'm very proud of myself for doing that. I feel very conflicted about this book because there were parts of it that I adored, and there were parts of it that I struggled with a bit. And I think it's really because this book is a memoir, and I really was so invested in the medical stories that she was sharing. Michelle Harper is an ER doctor. Stories that she shares about working in the hospital, about going to medical school, about how it was to be a Black woman doing that. I really appreciated her perspective, but I really think what stopped me from totally loving this is that she was trying to do a lot in telling her own personal story, and then also bringing in the aspects of her medical work and really making comments about our medical system and what that looks like in America. And then there's also just almost self-help aspects of this book that personally I just didn't agree with because I'm a different person than Michelle and just hold different beliefs. And while I think that's okay and good to read from, it did kind of draw me out. It was almost like there were two books in this. I hope that makes sense. I was right in between. There were some parts that were full 4-star for me, some parts that were more 3 stars, so I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. But it's amazing that she has time to be a doctor and write a memoir that's at times very beautifully written. She has such poignant thoughts and opinions about the medical system, and just has a valuable voice to add to overall medical science commentary and literature. And so yeah, it definitely solidified that I want to read more about the medical system in America, the health system in America. And I definitely think this book is worth your time if you're interested, and if you tend to like more memoir style books. I always struggle a little bit with memoirs, so I think that was more me than the book. So yes, I overall was kind of conflicted about this one, but it was definitely worth the time for sure, and I was compelled to keep reading. I wanted to hear more about Michelle and her work for sure. So I was glad that I got this for Book of the Month, because it was probably one that I never would have found out about without my Book of the Month subscription. So the last book that I finished this month was The Long Way Home by Louise Penny. This is the 10th in the Armand Gamache Three Pines series. It's a very beloved series to me, but this is definitely not my favorite from the series. This book is definitely a transition in the series. There's kind of been this overarching plot that was like building really in books 1 through 9 that kind of wrapped up in book 9, and I think we're kind of transitioning to maybe a different plot line or just a different tone in the series, and I feel like this book kind of, I don't want to say suffered from it, but I definitely felt bored by the mystery. This felt the most unrealistic to me, and Louise Penny's books are always a little quirky, a little unbelievable. You kind of have to suspend disbelief. You know, I don't read these books thinking this is exactly how, you know, police solve murders. It just, there is something a little off about them, but they're such compelling books, and the characters are, you just get wrapped up in their lives. Three Pines is like a place that I want to go. If I could step into the books, I would. But that being said, Louise Penny wraps her books up masterfully. I finished this book and was like, I want to give this 4 stars, but I was like, no, you didn't enjoy, or you wanted this book to be done, like the whole middle chunk. So I ended up giving it 3 stars, but she nails the endings, and I do think part of it is that I'm so involved in these characters and their lives. I care so much about the place of Three Pines, and I absolutely will be continuing on. And honestly, when you get on Goodreads, it's still a 4-star, which is good for Goodreads, but if you look at her other books, it's significantly lower rated than the others in the series, and I can definitely see why. Some reviewer was like, she let us down. And I don't know if I'd go so far to say that, but it definitely wasn't up to par as some of the other books in the series. But nonetheless, I had to read it to continue to move on. I will say these books are more like a cozy kind of feel to me, so I tend to enjoy them more in the fall and winter, which is kind of funny. This one is set in the summertime, so it was the appropriate season to read it, but I must say I do tend to enjoy them more kind of when I want that cozy enveloping read. Anyway, we can move on now. I just have a lot to say about Louise Penny. And then for the 3 books I'm in the middle of right now, the first being Risen Motherhood by Emily Jensen and Laura Whiffler. This is a Christian nonfiction book all about motherhood, and it kind of introduces the way that they choose to think about motherhood through a gospel and Christian lens, and then goes on to write different chapters about different topics. That being said, this does feel very like blog-like. Each kind of chapter you could go kind of read a blog post about it, and so I do feel like it's just bound up in this pretty edition to enjoy, but it's not one that I really just want to sit and read through because the chapters feel very repetitive. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that there's good truth spoken to me as a Christian and as a mother, and so I do appreciate that, but I'm just not as like loving it and wanting to zoom through it as I thought. And I did think I was going to want to take my time with it, as I typically do with Christian nonfiction, but I like really have like slowed down just because I was reading a chapter every day and it felt repetitive, and I felt like I wasn't gleaning as much from it. So who knows when I'll finish this. I picking it up once or twice a week, and I think that's a good pace for me right now. Also in the middle of Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I didn't get this finished for book club, whoops. But I'm really enjoying it and glad that I chose not to rush through it just for the sake of the discussion, and I still got to participate some at book club. I'm really enjoying this. This follows Efemelu and Obinze. They are two young people who meet in their home of Nigeria and fall in love. It's following their story of separation and where their lives go and will they come back together. I love the discussions of the American culture from Efemelu, who is a Nigerian, and just her thoughts on race and class and her home and America as it like becomes her home and then returning back to Nigeria. Yeah, there's so much goodness to like suck from this and to really think about and chew on. I think that this is great. I understand why Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is considered a masterful writer. I've halfway through and I feel like I know these characters and like I've been with them through their whole life. Like she just really wraps you up, and it feels like a classic in that way, where you really just get entangled and wrapped up in the characters and really understanding them. And yeah, it feels very epic in scope in that manner. So very excited to continue on with this, definitely enjoying it. But yeah, it's again not one that I'm like zooming through. And then for my audiobook by Molly Ball, this is a political biography about Nancy Pelosi, and I'm adoring it. I was a political science major in college. I'm very interested in politics. I've discovered from a couple books that I've read that I really enjoy political biographies, and this one's, no different. I'm enjoying learning about Nancy Pelosi, how she's affected American politics and policy. She's currently the most powerful woman in politics in the United States, at least, and it's been amazing to follow her rise to that in this book, and then also kind of her political style and how she's continuing to affect policy to this day. It never ceases to amaze me that such a few people affect billions of people, and there's a lot of power in politics, and it fascinates me, and I'm really enjoying this and glad that I ended up picking it up on audio. And again, 50% into that, so hopefully, like I said, I might finish some of these before July is over, but you'll see them in my August wrap-up nonetheless. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch me ramble on about books. I'd love to know your opinions on any of these books. Let's chat about it down in the comments below, or if you're interested in reading them or what you really enjoyed in July. I love to have conversations with you guys in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will talk to you later. Bye.